Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, everyone, to a conversation with James McBride. The White Plains Library Foundation is so happy to welcome you to this program. There's almost 250 emails in the Zoom tonight, and many of you are donors. Thank you so much for all your support, especially during the past year. It's May, and there's a lot going on at the library. Thanks to the incredible staff, here's a list of just some of the virtual programs happening. Programs about plants and flowers, 3D design, genealogy, citizenship, origami, meditation, there's story times, and a program about job hunting on LinkedIn, and a lot more. So many of these programs are made possible through community contributions to the foundation. We hope you'll check the library's website and the newsletter to find out what's coming up next. And now to start the conversation, I'd like to introduce the White Plains Public Library Director, Brian Kenny.
Thank you, Nancy. Good evening, everyone. As we're talking here this evening, if you've got any questions, you can drop them into the chat. And at the end of the conversation, we'll try to get to some of them. James McBride is an award-winning author, musician, and screenwriter. His memoir, The Color of Water, which was published back in 1996, has sold millions and was on the New York Times bestseller list for 2 years, and is now considered a classic. And when I say classic, don't be put off by that term. It is perhaps one of the most compelling and moving memoirs you could ever read. His debut novel, Miracle at St. Anna, was made into a film by Spike Lee, while his 2013 novel, The Good Lord Bird, about abolitionist John Brown, won the National Book Award for Fiction. James graduated from New York City Public Schools, the Oberlin Conservatory of Music, and Columbia's Graduate School of Journalism. In 2015, he was awarded the National Humanities Medal by President Obama for humanizing the complexities of discussing race in America. Tonight, James is with us to discuss his latest novel, Deacon King Kong. So this book was published almost simultaneously, if I have my dates right, with the advent of COVID. I think it was back in March of 2020. Is that right?
Yeah, about the time. Yeah. Yes.
So what was it like launching a book during a pandemic?
Well, the audiences got smaller and smaller. And then I was in DC and I was in the airport and there was nobody there. Just the people who were in the concessions, just the concession people. And there were like 2 people on the plane and, and I called the publisher and I said, I think we should, they kept saying, well, we're going to stop soon. But they finally said, okay, quit. So it was pretty strange. But I mean, it was like watching a race end, the runners were dropping out. It was like watching the Kentucky Derby start and, you have 30 horses and at the end, it's just you, and there's a jockey riding your back and beating your behind. I was like, why am I here? There's nobody here. It's just me and this airport, so, but, I mean, I suppose, the book got a lot of attention. Maybe it would have gotten more if people weren't, not so focused on the COVID, but it's hard to say, it came out at a time, when we were in a lot of turmoil and, I hope it provided some relief to folks,
Well, I think it was actually in some ways, I think it was a really good reading period because like from where I saw it, people really wanted to get together and read and talk about books together. It was one of the only things we could do for months.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's how, maybe I had the luck of the Irish. I mean, you can't tell, with books, you never know.
Right.
There's so many good books, so many good writers.
Yeah.
And
a lot of publishers shifted the books to the following year, and then this year ended up being much more even crowded. So in that sense, may have been.
Yeah, well, I never looked to the side. If I looked to the side and saw what people next to me were doing, I think I'd probably quit because there's so many really good writers who don't get the kind of attention they deserve. I mean, Pete Hamill died this year. That was just a terrible loss for the New York literary community. just really an inspirational person.
Mhm.
Inspiration to all writers from New York, from everywhere really, but certainly from New York, you know.
Mhm. So I'm going to switch this over a little to Deacon King Kong and give a synopsis for those who are listening, but you haven't had a chance yet to read the book. The story begins in September of 1969 in the Cause Projects in South Brooklyn, which I guess is fair to say is roughly based on Red Hook or inspired by Red Hook to some degree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to some degree, sure.
When a sort of crotchety, hard-drinking deacon, known by his nickname as Sport Coat, makes his way into the courtyard of the project, pulls a .38 from his pocket, and in front of everyone, shoots Dems, a young drug dealer, at point blank range. And one of the miracles of the many miracles in this book is that he doesn't kill him.
Right.
But that shot is like the proverbial pebble in the pond. It sets the whole story, and it's the action behind the whole story, and it remains a reference point throughout the whole book. And what I wanted to ask you is, where did the idea for this opening scene come from? Was this?
I have no idea. I mean, I really don't know. I can't really even tell you how the book was born. I love these kinds of old crotchety characters who, who kind of just tell it like it is, and they're not well educated, but they're very smart. They do terrible things to themselves and to each other. They drink too much. They smoke too much. They're just crooked, bent people walking around full of faults, but yet they're pure on the inside. And so I needed something to get this character moving. Deems, the young man who shot, was really an ancillary character in my head when this book, when this novel began. It was really about this old man and his journey, and about this community that existed in New York, that was really under the radar screen. New York City and the suburbs, and I'm sure White Plains to some degree. There are 1,000 different communities that are rarely seen. When you go to a Chinese restaurant and eat Chinese food, if it's Chinese food, because you go to China, they probably don't eat, shrimp fried rice or whatever but there's a whole family there. There's a story there. And I just wanted to show this particular story and how it fit into the wider tapestry of New York during that period. Because that was an interesting period during New York times, during the New York history. The Mets, the Mets with the Miracle Mets with Gil Hodges and Man on the Moon. Martin Luther King had just been assassinated. Lindsay was mayor, I think, John Lindsay.
Right. Stonewall happened that summer.
Stonewall happened. That's right. Stonewall was big too.
Right.
A lot of things happened. And so it was good to show. I wanted to, visit that stuff without saying, I'm going to visit this and I'm going, I wanted to show it from the perspective of how people who take the subway, who used to call it the IND, the BMT, IRT, how they saw it,
Yeah.
The strap hangers, we were called.
Yeah.
Please keep hands, that's on one side, off the doors on the other side. If you know what that looked like, you've been in New York a while.
Back in the early 80s, I went to work. My first library job was with the Brooklyn Public Library, and I was sent to Red Hook branch. And this was, early 1980s. And one of the things that really struck me when I was working there, really from as soon as I got there, was how Southern in some ways it was. And I'm talking about the older folk who had made that move, that migration, that had come north in their lives. They were still very much part of the community. So it was the language, it was the cadence, it was so much of that. And I was just wondering, was that something that you were interested in really embracing in this book? Was that a piece of it?
That was part of New York life if you were an African American, or if you were living in the African American community. African American community in New York was was very diverse, in its own way. People from Trinidad, the islands, the so-called islands, Manhattan's an island, but people from Barbados. But the African, the Southern influence in New York was extremely strong when I was a kid. Everybody I knew, their parents came from the South. Alabama, North Carolina, and every summer there was a long trek of people who would go down south, and that part of New York life has never really been. I don't want to say it has been written about that much, but I just never read much about it, And there's a lot to it that's complicated and very funny. And so when you look past the stereotypes of what Black people were supposed to be in New York during that time, they were very funny. I mean, I all of the ethnic groups in New York to me are very, very funny. People get insulted if you say the wrong thing, but I mean, it's nothing funnier than watching two Arab guys argue over the cost of a brake job, or watching two Jewish women fight about the cost of oranges. I mean, it's just that's just my, that's just where I live. And so I wanted to show this community in a way that how it was. And also, the stereotypical look at New York City's housing projects and New York City poor in general is, first of all, it's boring. Secondly, it's not accurate. And thirdly, it doesn't really show the dimension of character. It just doesn't show how deep people are. And I mean, Mayor Koch was funny. I mean, even if you didn't like Mayor Koch, when I was a kid, when I was young in graduate school, Mayor Koch was a funny guy. His first words was, I saw him on the street once and I said, Mayor Koch, how am I doing? He said, no, how I'm doing. How am I doing? That was his. And, Mayor Lindsay, when he was mayor, I was a boy at the time, but, he walked in, he was this Republican, very daft, dapper fella, who had good intentions. And he walked into some of the worst, savage, racial, cross-cultural teacher strike in Brownsville, Ocean Hill, Brownsville, that you cannot imagine. The Jewish people in Forest Hills with the projects. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that was going on that was really good stuff. And, compared to how we are now, compared to the hatred that cascades across this country now, that was a time of innocence compared to, where we were anyway before this most recent election.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. If this book is about any one thing, which is kind of a crazy statement since it's packed with so many things, I think it's about communities. And probably the community that's most at the center in this book is the church. Would you agree to that?
Oh, absolutely. There was a guy one time, he was a cop, two different people. One guy was a cop, both were cops in Red Hook. One guy was, he was a detective, and he noticed in Red Hook that there were a lot of vacant. Red Hook used to be really vacant. When I was like in the 70s and into the 80s, Red Hook got really bad because, the tax base disappeared. And at some point, somebody's going to figure out how this municipal bond thing works and how the bond, the people who create bond value and all this stuff, they just yank the guts of the community out so that everything there is worthless, including the real estate. So Red Hook was a vacant waterfront community. And this cop had the good sense to start buying houses in Red Hook and buildings, and he fixed them up nicely. I knew him. He was a very nice guy. I won't name him. He was an Irish American cat. Very nice guy. He always helped the church. He was very popular with everyone. And he's retired now. He moved to upstate New York, but his son is still around. Then there was another guy who was a cop, and he ended up going to Hollywood and becoming a movie, a producer of these cheap TV detective shows. And he wrote a book about his experience in Red Hook. And it's just a kind of, just veiled racist nonsense where, he describes drug dealers as these, these ruthless people with fangs, and they had braids, and they would, and that my point is that there are lots of ways to look at a community. And this community, in my opinion, has never been looked at with the kind, in terms of the media approach, never been looked at with the kind of freshness and depth that you look at, say, a hospital. where, you know, in media and in books, you know, or cop books and in media in general, you know, there's even the language of stat, you got to go, you know, emergency room. It's all, you always see the end result. You never see how we got there. And if you saw how we got there, you'd say, this community is not as bad as people think it is. I mean, I'm in Red Hook every week. You know, I have a program in my church. I'm there all the time. And the best people live there. They work. They have 2 or 3 jobs, these cheap jobs. They don't pay them anything. You know, the nicest people. And just because someone's poor doesn't mean that they're stupid. It just means they're poor. So what I wanted to show was that, you know, there's no difference really between a gutter in Brooklyn in 1969 and a gutter on the Lower East Side in 1925. It's just how people are viewed and how they view themselves. So yeah, it's about community from the perspective of the church, but not like one of these, you know, you go girl, you know, not one of those, you know, like these you know, this cheap stereotypical community where all the Black women have wigs and they all talk like Maya Angelou and they're deep in the hall, you know, rise up, but you know, no, it's not, I mean, this community is like any community. Some people are really nice, they're wonderful, and others are just creeps. You want to spend 5 minutes with them. Some don't brush their teeth. Others are just, you know, they live in these filthy projects and you walk in their apartments and they look like almost like a Fifth Avenue, you know, they've done all kinds of decorating, put up walls and made things beautiful. Listen, as a writer, your job is to have enough faith in humanity to know that no matter who a person is, there is a place in them that is good. And your job is to find that and connect it to the good in other people's hearts so that we can see where we all should be and where we all belong. And that's really been, it's just been a privilege to try to reflect that in this book and in my work.
One of the things that I, you know, really enjoyed in the book was how you were able to maintain this balance between humor and finding humor in people, you know, such as the ladies at church to some degree, but never making fun of them, you know, never sort of being inappropriate. I guess you could always say that it comes from a place of love more than it comes from anything like satire. And was that a balance that, you know, was that just came natural to you, or was that something you were thinking about?
No, I come from a funny family. You know, my mother was very funny, you know. For those of you who read, you know, The Color of Water, you know, my mother was Jewish and she was just a very funny person. Jewish people are funny. Now, don't get mad if you're Jewish and say Jewish people are not. They're very serious. If you are, you know, write a letter to the New York Times, whatever. But Jewish people are just funny people. I mean, there's a self-depreciation part that exists in Jewish life. I don't know if the humility or, you know, why us? I don't know what it is, but so my mother was very funny and my family, we were always we learned to laugh at things. And I think you could say that about any group. What America gives you is the freedom to laugh at parts of your culture that might not be funny if you were back in the old country. What it takes from you, though, are the parts of your culture that make you strong and that make you feel worthful. And that's not funny. But I do think, you know, comedy is the quickest way to get to a person's heart. And I don't want to hear anything. I don't want to read a book that makes me sad. You know why? I mean, there's enough going on. I'd rather read something that lifts my spirit, you know?
Yeah, well, I think that's probably one of the reasons why this was a great read the last 9 to 12 months for a lot of readers. You know, what you were saying about humor in people, I think also was true for violence in the book. You know, in like the many failed, like you've got this character Sport Coat who's kind of moving around, you know, around town being hidden, which is, you know, kind of ridiculous in its own way and very funny. And then on top of that, you've got these attempts on his life which are so serious / funny at the same time. Is this, I mean, you already answered this, but is this type of humor new for you?
Well,
Or
yeah, it's new and it's not easy to pull off because, you have to ask the reader to have some faith in the story so that he or she, or they, will accept your version of reality. Look, violence is easy. I mean, it's like bad science fiction. I mean, if you don't like the jam that Trudy is in, you can just have her become a vapor and she can just vaporize and then make herself go somewhere else. You could just do another version of like Bewitched, the TV show. You just go, beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, and then boop, she goes somewhere else. So I mean, yeah, look, you didn't want to. I don't want to telegraph the end for the reader, but it was important that the bad stuff that was supposed to happen to this old guy who really didn't know what he was doing didn't happen, especially when I reveal a lot of his history, which was also very funny and comically tragic. That kind of stuff is magnetic. If you can pull it off, you have the right kind of character. And it's important that you have a sort of a sheen on your work so that you don't have the sort of YouTube version of characters, which, we live in a society where, if you burp, you can do a YouTube, you can a TikTok, whatever. I don't know. I don't look at this stuff, but you could TikTok your burp. I mean, and I'm sure like you can get views, and what's a view? It's nothing. You work hard to polish, to buff the whole thing so that people just follow the Corvette Stingray supercar down the street with their eyeballs. And if they're in for the ride, they generally, if they're smiling, they generally will stick around, unless you just try to be too cute. Randy Newman, I think it was Randy Newman. No, it was Alfred Newman, his cousin, who's a great composer, said something when he was scoring films. He said, never tell the same joke twice. So, when he was scoring films, he'd always say, okay, this theme works here, but I'm not going to just do it to death, and that same motif or that same mentality exists in writing books as well. You tell the joke, you don't hammer it home, you hit him, you do like Milton Berle, one of those cats, you just hit him and then you keep going, keep going, just roll on.
one of my favorite characters in the book was, I guess you'd call him a small-time mafioso, Elephant, or I guess Elefante in Italian.
Right, Elefante, yeah.
Yeah, it's an incredibly poignant story, his story. And because the storytelling in the book is so strong, we're willing to go there, kind of like outside the main narrative into this, Elefante novella in a way. So I was just like, why was that important to you to have that story in the book?
Well, I mean, the Italian story in New York, or at least in Red Hook, which, where a lot of this came from, the Italians were really, really very, first of all, they lived in the projects before the blacks came. Red Hook was created for the Italian and immigrant dock workers who unloaded the ships. And a lot of those Italians stayed after they moved out of the project. The ones who bought houses around Red Hook stayed. And there was a lot of contact between the Italian and the Black community, and a lot of people getting along. We just hear about the stories where people did not get along. But there was a lot of contact. I wouldn't say camaraderie, but there was a lot of neighborliness. And I wanted to sort of talk about it in a way that showed that sense of family and the sense of Catholic decency that is so intrinsic to Italian American life in New York. Because when I wrote Miracle at St. Anna, which was based in Italy, I became enamored with or fascinated by the deep sense of purpose, and also the deep sense of, I wouldn't say inferiority, but the deep sense of like silent, quiet pride that Italians exhibit, and their sense of not being heard in the greater cosmic sense of how Europe operates. And in America, that was also the case as well. That's why Mario Puzo was so good. You know, that's why he was so good, because he really understood that dynamic. I wanted to just play with it a little bit, because it's really hard to be decent when your back is against the wall. It's easy to be decent when you have a big fat bank account and you can type in on the computer, I believe every man and woman is equal. But it's a whole different thing when you're in the community and everyone's, you know, your mother's friends are moving away and everything's, you know, and all your friends are leaving and it's just still you don't want to go. And these new people are coming. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, but you've been told they're bad, but then there's some pretty good ones. And you're dealing with this dynamic, and you try to make decent choices. And this is a man who tried to make, he and his mother, despite their limited circumstances, did their best to make decent choices, which made him one of my favorite characters in the book as well. And as well as with Potts, the police officer.
Yeah, well, that was something. I mean, you even have this more than halfway decent Irish cop in there.
Well, I mean, look, I'm not an apologist for the police in these days, and I've never been one to kick at the cops. I mean, you know, I've had my issues, really, but there are lots of really good stories that come out of the police force, and there are a lot of really good cops. And this character was just one of those good guys. I didn't even see him as a cop, really. You know, I see, and not, by the way, it's not that I was, you know, you have to be careful what you say about the police, because people get so pissed off. But he was just a good guy in a precinct that really didn't do a lot of good things. And so where does a good cop, you know, where does that where does that put a person like him, who was unhappily married, you know, trying to do right? He already got punished for it. You know, I'm not the kind of person who there's enough people who can point out the bad and everything. I'm not one of those people. So, I knew police officers like this guy. And I liked him because he was not just a cop. He was a guy who could sing the old Irish song. If you've ever been around Irish people in New York, they'll let you know right away that the Irish will tell you that they know how the world will break your heart, but they're awfully lot of fun to be around. So all of these characters in the book are people I'd like to have. These are people that I enjoy being with. And I don't think I can write a book about people that I don't like. I enjoyed being with all of them, you know. I miss them, you know. They were, and the church ladies were just fantastic. They just were great. I just loved them. I mean, they were so smart and courageous and brave and wise, you know. So, you know, what a great job I have. I get to meet people that I like and spend time with them. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
That's for sure. Something else I really enjoyed about this book was, you know, in a way, it's kind of like a love story, or many love stories. I mean, you've got Sportcoat and Hetty, and, you know, I know that was probably, you know, well, who's to say, you know, I mean, maybe that was delusional on his part. Maybe he was making that up. Maybe she was in some way really there. But those dialogues and the way their relationship changed after she was dead was a real love story. And, you know,
I'm glad you saw that. Go ahead.
I'm just going to list them in case you disagreed with me about it being a love story. Sister Gian Potts and Elefante and his loneliness and finding a fiance, and, you know, even Sportcoat and Debs. I mean, in a way, you know, not romantic love, but that was a great love there between the two of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, love makes the world go round, really. And if you can find ways to share with the reader, it's just wonderful to read about. I mean, Hetty was sport coach's wife was hovered in the air throughout the creation of the book. And part of that is because in real life, Black women are oftentimes, they're treated so badly in terms of what society thinks. I mean, the dimension of they're so deep, they have so much going on. They handle stuff with so much sophisticated brilliance for which they never get credit. I really thought it was important to show Hetty, especially at the end, as someone who really understood love. Sister G and Potts, you know, that whole interracial dance that happens with them, gave me and those characters a chance to cross the great divide in a way that was, you know, that readers, I hope, would understand and appreciate. So you know, and Potts, I mean, and Elefante and Melissa, again, it was just, love makes everything fresh, and it adds a sheen to the sheen of possibility to everything. So, and all of those love affairs, they were just organic. I didn't really like start the book saying, okay, he's going to be with her. It didn't really happen that. I mean, real good books don't happen like that. There's an organic quality that takes place that you say, it wouldn't be nice if, you know, is it possible? Maybe, you know, and then the whole, you know, the whole thing starts to just roll out.
Yeah. Well, I think the love is one of the things that makes it, or makes these stories feel so fresh, because there's something new. They're embarking on something, you know, that's like a new phase in their lives.
Well, I mean, I never thought of myself as a love, you know, as like a love writer, but, you know, I'm getting a new car now, so I think I'm in love, you know, with a Honda. No, I mean, I mean, you know, you know, I in my earlier books, I can't even remember now. I mean, you know, they start to come together, but Good Lord Bird is a love story between a man and a boy. And I can't remember any before that, but these are important things, you know. I mean, why read a book if it doesn't give you hope? You know, that maybe love is around the corner. You know, even my cat, who doesn't even have another cat, she had another cat and she got rid of him. She divorced him. But I mean, I'm sure, but at 3 o'clock in the morning, she goes in the window. She's got some guy, some tiger, you know, lion looking creature comes around here, you know, and she makes noises that I never heard before in my life, like this. I mean, try hearing that at 3 in the morning, but that's love too. And that's, you know, so you know, look, you work with what you got, you know?
Right. Tell us a little bit, if you would, about how you're still involved in the Red Hook community.
It's not that big a deal. I have a music program in my church. We needed an organist. This is going back 7 or 8 years now. We needed an organist. We couldn't find anybody. Everybody we found were these jive cats, you know. Listen, when you're looking for an organ player and you call up somebody and they leave a message and the message says, have a blessed day, forget it. Don't call them no more. That's just like, that's one of these thoughts and prayers types of dudes. So I said, why are we, you know, looking around, you know, pay our hard money to some ding dong who's going to show up for 4 Sundays and then demand a rate? Let's just make our own organist. Yeah. So we started a program, and we started out with, like, you know, 8 kids with maybe 12 kids with sticks and buckets. And then we gradually started adding instruments, and we've had some ups and downs. We have 2 now who are 3. Well, 1 we lost because of COVID. I don't know if she's coming back. Because, you know, what COVID did, in addition to killing people, is that it displaced a lot of poor people. People had to move, and, you know, but so we have a program. We teach kids piano, acoustic and electric bass and drums. But right now we're just focused on bass and drums because those are the ones we could do on Zoom. We just started back in person last week.
Oh,
And
fabulous.
so it's good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It must be nice to have that back. We
Oh
just,
man, I mean, this is so hard for the kids. Yeah, it's been great. I mean, it's great to just be back, you know.
yeah.
Yeah.
When you stand back and look at your career, your books are very well spaced. I guess you could say that there's plenty of breathing room between them. So I just was wondering about your process as a writer.
Well, I wake up in the morning and I write until about noon, you know, and then I have kids, and my kids are my youngest is in college now, and so, but my daughter's back now, and then my youngest is coming home from school. I'm a single dad, so I have fatherly duties, and I still play music. I still write music. I practice. Um, I teach at NYU and I teach at the church. So I'm pretty busy. Writing is not my life. Life is my life. So my job is to stay around people and to make sure I hear what people are saying. And so I can't just churn out, like some writers write the same book again and again. I mean, I could have written The Color of Water like 10 different ways and just done speeches the rest of my life, but evolution, you got to evolve, you got to change, so.
So we got a question here from Aaron Steinberg, who writes that right now we hear a lot of criticism of people writing from perspective of identities that are not their own. And I'm curious how you took to writing the first person in a dialogue of so many different characters of different ages, genders, races. You could add classes.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think, stories belong to the world. It doesn't matter who tells it. A lot of that, I don't agree that a person has to be, a certain race or a certain sex to tell someone's story. The stories are meant to move people to justice. So it doesn't, I don't care. Look, the people need water, and I don't care who brings it. I would just say, I just don't agree with it. If someone's good, they're just good. I mean, William Styron got creamed for writing Nat Turner's Rebellion. I think that was the name of the book. I read the book. I thought it was I thought it was a pretty good book. I mean, I think the real question is, what books are promoted and who's reading them.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of someone writing a book who's not part of this group or that group, I think that's really not being fair to the writer. Look, if the book is good and people read it, just,
I'm sorry.
I've answered the gentleman's question.
I think you have. Here's something that I didn't think about. Somebody writes in, when you describe sport coats, health issues, and when you describe all the ways to get rid of a curse, it's like you're riffing. Do you have music in your head when you're writing?
Not really. I mean, what music, music teaches you a lot of technical things that come in handy when you're writing, if you listen to a fugue and it comes back at you another way, or if you listen to Beethoven and you hear the third string part and it makes perfect sense, or you hear Sonny Rollins play 2 or 3 choruses of one of his great standards and none of them is like the one before, you realize that you're not that good at what you do, no matter how good you become or said to be. So what I tend to do is I tend to kind of state a melody and then see if I can find ways to harmonize it, if you will, without chatting about the whole thing again and again. I mean, it's nothing worse than going to a concert and some guy's sawing away at the violin or some guy's playing a trumpet and then, and 3 hours pass and you look at your watch and you came to the concert at 7, 3 hours pass and you look at your watch and it's 7:15 because the guy's blah, blah, because there's no melody. So I try to just state cleanly what I'm doing and then there are times when it pushes in directions that really work, but oftentimes it doesn't, and I end up not using the material. That whole business of exposition is really, really difficult to excise just from your work. You have to fall in love with your ideas and not your words.
So one last question here, which is a double header. And these are the burning questions I think all readers want to know about this book. Number one, where did the ants come from? Not physically, but the idea of the ants. And I'll let you. And then the second part of this one, which you probably don't want to answer, and I can imagine why not, but it's one of the most burning questions is, of course, what happened to the Christmas box?
All right. Well, the ants, it was just about, really, it was a question of roaches. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to, I just didn't want to deal with roaches. I just didn't want to, I have too many memories of my own life of roaches just, peering out of nowhere. And it just, just as an object of visual acuity, ants are wonderful to think about, thousands of them is coming. But it was good. I really don't know, to be honest with you. I don't know what happened to the Christmas box. Once the book ended, I couldn't care less about the Christmas box. I wrote the end, and then I went to the publisher and I went like, where's my money? The end. I couldn't, you're seeing the Christmas, here's the Christmas right here. That's the box. It's, I really don't know. It wasn't about the box. It was never about the box. It was always about the church. It was always about, will this organization survive? Will these people really understand that what Hetty tried to do was to show them how to be respectful towards each other and to love each other. But the box was really more about the metaphorical business of love that Hetty left behind for the church and for her husband, because she was a person, they always say in church, when there's 10 people, there's only 2 of them that are really Christian. The other 8 are just wearing the fancy hats on Sunday. Hetty was one of those 2 special people. And so the box was really more about her desire and giving back to the church and to her husband, to show them that we have valuable things here and we take care of these things, and let's respect what little tradition we have here that's left.
And as the book ends, I think we feel like the church isn't going to just survive, but it's positioned to thrive.
Yes, how I wish that were truly true, but in real life, my church is surviving, just fine. I mean, it could be doing better, but it's surviving. It's fine. In the book, the church is in '69. The Black church was very strong, and it's become, like many churches, splintered and not nearly as effective and as good as it could be. But you work with what you have, and I think church is a good thing. All religious institutions are good things. I strongly believe that religion, in whatever your faith, it helps. Now, I'm not talking about these bozos who run around, claiming to be Christians. That's different. They're not really religious people. Let me eat those words. I'm not talking about the right-wing people who just go around proclaiming Jesus is great, Black Lives Matter is just garbage. They're just confused. I'm talking about real churches, real temples, real synagogues, real houses of worship where people just love each other and show respect towards people who are different. Because I grew up in a home where religion was important. And, as I've gotten older, I've become even more cognizant how important religion is for everyone, including, for Jewish people, because of my own history. And I don't think it hurts people to be religious. And I don't think you need to knock people over the head with it either. I just think to have a sense of morality that is rooted in something that is traditional and that is culturally rich is good, so long as you don't think yours is better than anyone else's. Whatever works for you.
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong with that. I don't know. I probably insulted half the audience, but I certainly didn't mean to.
Well, that's the advantage of Zoom. We don't have to see how insulted they are. If they
Well,
are.
I mean,
I don't think you've insulted anyone tonight, so I wouldn't worry about it. But on that optimistic note, I just want to say thank you again for joining us. James, it was an absolute pleasure. I'd like to remind everybody that listening that hearing the talk tonight was great, but reading the book is even better. And you should stop by the library, pick up a copy. We have some free copies as long as they last. And on May 25th, Beth Carver, who is president of the White Plains Library Foundation, and Heather Miller, who's director of the Slater Center, will be moderating a discussion on the book. So try to make it to that. Books, when they're talked about, become even more valuable and meaningful. So on that note, James, thank you again.
well, thank you very much. And it's just been a pleasure. I'm blabbing pretty hard, but I hope everybody had a really good time. And that's it.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot. See you later.
Bye-bye.
All right. So long.